Hello there, my friends. Salamun alaikum. It's good to be with you again. Over the past 2 or 3 years, I've translated almost the entire Quran. I've went through it and translated almost 80% of the Quran. And I want to share with you the main themes. I think if I could summarize it in about 20 points, I'd like to highlight for you those 20 ideas that one could summarize the Quran to. And I want to list that for you and then maybe give you an example or thought on each one of those. So let's quickly go through the list. The first set of 6 ideas that one cannot but pick up in the Quran if you read through the text are the following. Number 1 is that the one true God with all his attributes, that needs to be acknowledged. You need to acknowledge that there is one true deity, creator of the universe. He who is in absolute and ultimate control. So I added here the one true God with all his attributes, And by attributes, I mean he hears all, sees all, controls all, as the finals say, has full knowledge of the future, the past, of the unseen, and is far beyond what any person could fathom him to be. So that's the first one. The second one is that there is a world beyond. So the second point that the Quran clearly makes is that this world is not it. There is also a world beyond, and it refers to the akhirah. And the akhirah is another word for the life hereafter, or the world hereafter, or the next life. And that is, of course, the second important point that the Quran raises, is that this experience here in this life of ours is not it. And that there is something in us that will survive this life. That there is a core essence within us that, and the universe will preserve our memories, our recollections, our emotions. Everything will be preserved in a register, in a formally kept register, which is 100% accurate, and that those emotions, those experiences, those recollections, those ideas, those thoughts would be recreated within a new form. And that is how the Quran teaches, is that we shall be recomposed in a new form after this life. The third idea is that there is a final moment of judgment. When we do reconstitute ourselves, when that takes place after this world, after this life, then we shall account for whatever actions whatever crimes we committed in this world, unaccounted for, or whatever other actions we practice that were beneficial, that we were not rewarded for. And so that ultimate moment of judgment and of equalization will occur. Then there is the code, God's code. And that refers to, number 1, the book, which is the scripture, but also the greater code, the greater book, the book that lays out the blueprint for the cosmos, not only for the present, but for future, for the past, the grand code, the supreme code, the ultimate code, which is more than the Quran. It spells out in detail. It sets out the pathway for the universe, for the cosmos, for all life, and that is God's code. And that is the ultimate book. Then the next one is God's envoys. The Quran highlights the position of men and in some cases women. I'm thinking of Maryam, the mother of Prophet Jesus Christ. And it highlights the role that these human agents played in history to be a bridge between God and mankind, humanity in general. So that is another point that the Quran makes abundantly clear. Then the forces of intervention, often referred to in the Quran as malaika and translated into English as angels, But God has certain special forces, creation, creatures, who are able to intervene in our experience, in our lives. So, for example, the angel Gabriel, Jibril, is a force of nature that shall intervene in the entire way that nature plays out in the universe, whether it is natural disasters or whatever. God works through these natural forces, simply referred to as angels, which the Quran refers to by a different word called malaika. Then, going on to number 7, the cardinal practices which the Quran calls for is the number 1, salah. The Quran over and over says establish, build, create, bring into being salah, which is reduced simplistically to a ritual, but upon closer investigation, if you look at the Quran, it actually refers to generally a sense of observance, a sense of order, a sense of general law-abidingness to the will of God. And I've written on that, and there are videos on that. Social investment, infaq or rizq. Now that is something which the classic Muslim traditionalist scholars omit, but the word infaq or rizq, it appears so many times, they just conflate it with zakah or with sadaqah. But social investment is another commonly called for practice. Number 9, promoting personal and social moral refinement and dignity. That is ita'uz zakah. Also another word that has been reduced simplistically to a 2.5% tax. The 2.5% doesn't appear in the Quran. But zakah, in fact, the word itself means purity. So we are looking at promoting dignity and moral refinement. And dignity is something that goes hand in hand with a sense of charity, a sense of selflessness. So all of those are mixed in with the word zakah, another concept the Quran pushes very, very ubiquitously. Globalizing best practice, and that is the Hajj, again reduced to a simple ritual. But the Quran, in fact, speaks about Abraham as establishing a institute that shall act in the benefit of all humanity. So in other words, creating a center of best practice, a center of what we are looking at here, implementation of the scriptural core ideas. And that is really what Hajj is. It is about globalizing truth, globalizing righteousness, globalizing justice, submission to what is right and righteous. Number 11, commemorating Allah, God, privately and publicly. This is a very commonly called for. Wazkurullah wala zikrullah akbar. It often calls on people to celebrate, to commemorate, to use every opportunity to keep God alive in society. The idea of God, the idea of theism, to keep that idea alive and to institutionalize God within our activities, our events, our celebrations, whatever we do as people, is to keep the idea, keep celebrating God. That's, of course, also commonly mentioned in the Quran. Just leadership and loyal followership. The idea of good leadership. Even before looking at the Quran, one cannot imagine a community, a house, a team, a sports team, a whatever, church group, whatever, without there being a system of authority in place. And if people ask you, you don't need authority, then that's an unproven. In fact, the opposite has been proven, that where there's no authority, there is chaos. Conscientiousness, discretion, self-restraint. That is summarized in the word taqwa. What taqullah. It is taqwa is the word waqaya, which is where the word taqwa comes from, and taqwa means to observe for yourself to guard yourself. We come to the meaning conscientiousness, discretion, and self-restraint. And one thing that we must remember, the Qur'an even calls for taqwa before it calls for you to accept the Qur'an. It says that taqwa precedes your acceptance of the Qur'an. If you read the first few verses of the first major chapter in the Qur'an, Surah Baqarah, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. The book is a guidance to those who have already developed a sense of conscientiousness. So you cannot find guidance in the book if you do not already have a sense of conscientiousness, a sense of discretion, a sense of self-restraint. And also the converse, if you find a people devoid of conscientiousness, devoid of discretion, devoid of self-restraint, the Quran shall not guide them. There's no way that they can find guidance if they are blind followers, if they are self-righteous, if they are arrogant, if they are in any way, blind to truth or to what is possible. So conscientiousness is a prerequisite to becoming a Muslim. Acting justly and fairly, that is very commonly mentioned in the Quran. Honesty, to speak the truth. Lifelong reflection and learning, aql, very commonly listed idea. Personal and collective exertion in defense of right. The Quran over and over calls on those who are harmed in any way, those who are called on to help, those whose rights are being trampled on, to stand up and defend themselves, to raise arms and to conduct a defensive war against those who would offend against them. Then I'm going to the last few on this list are the cardinal evils that are mentioned in the Quran. Number 1 or number 18 in the bigger list, impostering God. Impostering God. In other words, making obeisance or acknowledgement of any other being, law, authority, in derogation or in parallel or in competition with God, with Allah. So there is no law, there is no scripture, there is no man, there is no force that can be given the same type of sacred recognition as one gives to the one true God. And we're not talking about everyday rules, we're talking about something, if you are promoting something that is sacred. And I always say that if you turn the book written by Bukhari or written by Abu Huraira or anyone else, if you turn that into God's law, you have imposted God. You have imposted Allah. Number 19, suppressing, obfuscating or vacillating on truth. Very, very commonly mentioned. And those people who are on that, often referred to as the munafiqin, those who vacillate. It is a terrible sin, a terrible evil to obfuscate and to vacillate on truth. To obfuscate, the word kafir is used in the Quran, is to obfuscate, to try and fool around with what is true, try and con people into not seeing what is true, clouding people's judgment on what is true. Those are all forms of suppression and obfuscation of truth and vacillating on truth. The 20th point is oppression, to take any right of any person that is God-given to them. For example, to take the life of a person, to take the property of a person, to take the freedom of a person. These are all part of oppression, and they fall under the most gravest evils. Number 21, greed and usury. Nothing is more condemned in an economic sense than greed and usury. Now the Quran mentions, for example, those who insist on charging usury must take note of war on them from God and His apostle. And then on another place, God decries and condemns those who fiddle with the scales, with the accurate measurement in trade and in commerce. So these are all parts of greed and usury. Number 22, apathy and social detachment. Apathy and social detachment. The Quran uses words like ghafilun, disinterested. So people are constantly called on not to be detached, not to be apathetic. And in particular, the Quran refers to the plight of the orphan, those who are defenseless in society, the plight of the weak, parents, older, the elderly in society, and to be apathetic and socially detached from the general issues and problems facing people. And then there's a word here, social detachment is tawalla, abasa wa tawalla. It is to turn your back to the plight of others. Then number 23, cowardice, not rising when you are supposed to rise to defend yourselves or those who are near and dear to you. And then finally, murder. The Quran makes a very specific point that he who takes in a life unjustly shall be in hell eternally. So murder is absolutely on this list. And that, my dear friends, are the 24 points that and if you've got more, if you think I've left out, please put it in the comments or remind me in the comments. Interestingly, these 24 points here, and there could be one or two more, we could consolidate maybe some of them. But these are, interestingly, some of the key points that you will find in the Mu'tazila or the rationalist schools of Islam, those who've made a very intelligent study of the Holy Book, like the Zaydiyah or the Ithna Ashari, or these points are commonly listed there. Of course, we know that in the normal Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they've only reduced everything to 5 rituals like Salah, Zakah, and they have a set of Arkanul Iman, which is, believe in God and His angels and all of those, but not really teased out in this way where we actually hone in on these. Like, for example, the 5 pillars of the Sunni mazhab or the Sunni school of thought doesn't include, 5 pillars of Islam doesn't include, for example, honesty or justice, which is commonly called for. Or, taqwa, it's not on the list. Taqwa is not on the list. Sabr is not on the list of the 5 pillars. Why is it not on the list? It's in the Quran. It's mentioned over and over and over. So, this is just my reading, these 24, and I hope that is of use to you. Alhamdulillah.